Alright, gentlemen, I know it's been several months since we've worked with error, um, but that's what this tape is for. The first part I'm just going to kind of talk through, so you don't even have to be watching the movie, because this was one that we kind of just spoke through together in class. We talked about how when you make a little mistake when you're measuring something, whether it be distance or weights or amounts or volume or anything, if you make a little teeny tiny mistake, it can actually become a very, very huge mistake. Right? We talked about, like if we were using a trundle wheel, and I measured the circumference wrong. Maybe I measured it by 2 feet off. Every time I measure with that trundle wheel, every rotation is going to be off. And the more times I measure with it, the more off my final answer is going to be. And we talked about how anytime you make a mistake with measuring, anytime you go to calculate with that measurement, it's going to make a big difference. We also talked about especially things like when you're doing baking, for instance. If you use the wrong ingredient that sounds very close, or if you measure in cups instead of pints, or if you measure teaspoon instead of tablespoon, whatever you're making is going to come out to be probably pretty disgusting. And I know we all like food, so that would be a very bad thing. We also talked about how units can be accurate in some cases, but not in others. We talked about how typically we don't measure humans in feet, right? We're not all 5 feet or 6 feet tall. We're 5'4", we're 5'8", we're 6'1". We use feet and inches. But if I were measuring a mountain, I'm not going to want to measure to the nearest inch because in the case of a mountain that's huge, the difference of a foot is not that much difference. But in the case of a person, the difference between 5 feet and 6 feet is very, very big. Okay? So for instance, if I wanted to measure like the outside of our school walls, the height of those, I've got many choices of units I can use. I could use inches, centimeters, meters, yards, feet, miles, kilometers, any of 100 things. But I'm going to look at what I'm measuring, decide which unit would be best. So if I'm measuring the height of those outside school walls, which would you use? Out of inches, miles, or feet, which one would you use? I'm hoping you said feet. Inches, if I were to measure the outside of this school, the outside of this building, which is like 6 or 7 stories, with inches, I'm going to be out there forever measuring this thing. But miles, this building is not that tall. It's only, it's really not that tall. So to measure with miles, I'd come up with like 0.1 mile or something like that, or 0.07 miles, which is not very accurate. But if I were to measure in feet, I'd probably get a pretty accurate kind of sense of how tall it is. It's probably going to be close to 60 or 70 feet, which is nice and accurate, but it's not so teeny tiny that it takes forever to measure. Okay, I could go the other way. I could tell you what I'm using, what unit I'm using, and you could tell me what I'm measuring. For instance, if I wanted to use inches, give me some examples of what I could measure. Okay, anything like a pencil, the side of a calculator, TV screens are measured in inches. Because if I were to go measure TV screens in feet, then it'd be like a 1 foot screen, a 2 foot screen, a 3 foot screen, right? But inches is going to give us a little bit more accuracy. It's going to tell us a little bit more specifically what it is, right? So those are two kind of things that I may ask you, and you may have to kind of write out in words. I may say, give me an example when you make a small mistake or a small error in measurement, and it's going to lead to some very large mistake. Or I may say something like, if I'm measuring the height of the outside school walls, what unit should I use? And those are things you're going to have to write out. I don't check for spelling, you guys know that. So long as I know what you're saying, I'm going to be fine with that. And you can go with metric or standard US, I'll take either or. So that's really all there is to that part.